How did this idea come to you? Because I know from your past books, you dive deep into the content well before you write it. Give us the backstory.
Yeah, the backstory is pretty simple. I was just really frustrated. I was making all kinds of when decisions in my own life. You know, when in the day should I do certain kinds of work? When in the day should I do other kinds of work? When should I exercise? When should I start a project? When should I abandon a project? And I felt that I was making these decisions in a pretty sloppy way, and I wanted to make them in a better way. So I started looking around for some guidance, and to my surprise, that guidance didn't exist. And then, you know, as you say, I spent a lot of my time mucking around in research, and it just, out of curiosity, wait a second, there's got to be a little bit of research on this. And I started looking, and that took me down this rabbit hole for 2 years of this massive amount of research in many, many fields across dozens of disciplines, asking questions like, how does time of day affect what we do and how we do it? How do beginning shape our behavior? How do ending shape our behavior? What happens to people at the midpoint of something? How do groups synchronize in time? It was just this wealth of research and data that hadn't really been adequately accounted for. And so I said, you know, this is the kind of book I need. I mean, I basically wrote this book so I could read it because I wanted to make better when decisions.
Yeah, and
I wish someone else had written the book because it was a hard book to write.
Yeah, exactly. You had to do 2 years of digging just to write a book that you needed to read in the first place.
Exactly.
Well, you lay it out so beautifully. Give us a great little summary there. So we're going to kind of pick and pop here in and out of the book.
Sure.
Let's start with that first chapter because this was interesting to me. This was by far for me the most enlightening part of the book because there is what you call, it's the first chapter, the hidden pattern of everyday life. Okay, What does that mean? What's that look like for all of us?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question about what it looks like because we can draw a picture of it. What a mountain of research has shown is that we tend to move through the day in 3 stages: a peak, a trough, and a recovery. Up, down, up. Peak, trough, recovery. Most of us move through the day in that order. People who are strong night owls, people who have what's called an evening chronotype, who go to sleep late and wake up late, they tend to move through the day in the reverse order. But this pattern, peak, trough, recovery, is a pattern of our mood, but it also gives us some hints about the pattern of our performance. And what the research tells us are a few really important things. One, our brain power does not stay the same throughout the day. It changes. This is really essential. I wish someone had told me this before I turned 50. Our brain power doesn't stay the same over the course of the day. It changes. It changes sometimes in dramatic ways. It changes in somewhat predictable ways. And most important, the right time to do a particular kind of work depends on the nature of that work.
Wow. Okay, there's so much here, folks. We're going to stay here. We're going to camp for a minute. The first thing, pages 14 and 15, I like to do book notes for these people so they can get right to it. Okay, cool. So page 14 and 15, we see the first graphs of the book. And I'm just going to blast through these, Dan, and then tee you up, okay? You got 3 different graphs.
As you can tell, I love graphs.
Yes, you do. As well, you should. So 3 graphs, and they all say that people, here's what they put out: happiness. People feel increasingly happy throughout the morning, less happy in the afternoon, happier again in the evening. Stay with me, folks. There's a pattern. People feel increasingly warm towards others. So you're friendlier throughout the morning, less friendly in the afternoon, and yet you get that warmth back in the evening. And yes, the pattern holds. People enjoy themselves. So we like ourselves more, Dan, in the morning and less in the afternoon. And more in the evening. And I got to tell you, I don't mean to skip ahead here because there's a chapter we're going to get to on rest, but I was listening to you just now and I'm thinking to myself, our friends over in Spain have figured this out, haven't they?
Well, you have a really good point there. I mean, well, yeah, the answer is yes and no. I mean, there is, as you know, there's a whole chapter on breaks, and we don't take breaks seriously enough. Right. We should be taking more breaks. We should be taking certain kinds of breaks. But what's interesting is that this idea of some kind of afternoon rest, which Spain was famous for, is actually not a terrible idea. Yeah. There's some science behind it. Now, what's interesting is that Spain itself got rid of the siesta about 12 years ago to try to be more like us.
That is true.
And I'm saying we want to be a little bit, we don't want to go totally Spanish, but we want to be a little bit more like Spain. Because I don't think that we want to have I don't think it's good for business to have
a
3.5-hour siesta with giant plates of seafood paella and 3 glasses of red wine. I mean, it's a really dark and sleepy day here in Washington. This afternoon, I would have loved it here in my home.
Yes.
But as a general principle, it's probably not a good idea. But as you say, there is this predictable pattern, and that pattern gives us clues about what we should do when.
So what's going on? Just another follow-up. It's very interesting in all 3 of those graphs. It proves that there is a natural physiological dip, for a lack of a better way to say it. Why is that? What's happening in our bodies? Did you research that?
It's hard to actually put a pin in that specifically. Our body is a set of very complex systems. So we have our endocrine system, our system of hormones. Body temperature actually plays a pretty significant role in all of this. And then there are other ways simply to measure alertness. Some of it, everything from glucose levels to overall mental sharpness. But what we know from this research is, so the why behind it is complicated. What we should do about it is less complicated. And what we should do about it is the following. During our peak, which for most of us is the morning. Again, for night owls, it's later in the day. During our peak, that's when we are most vigilant. And that's the key word in all this research, vigilance. When we're most vigilant, we're able to bat away distractions. And that makes the peak the best time for doing analytic work that requires heads down, focus, attention, energy, writing a report, analyzing data. That's when we should be doing. So during the peak, we should be doing our analytic work. During the trough, as you're saying, that dip, that's not good for very much. A lot of bad stuff happens there. I'm not joking. You know from the book.
Yeah.
You have a disproportionate number of traffic accidents, and healthcare is just an abject disaster that time of day. More medical errors, all kinds of other botched surgeries, colonoscopies that are less effective, doctors prescribing unnecessary antibiotics, physicians and nurses inside of hospitals not washing their hands very often. There's standardized test scores go down. That trough is not a good time. And so what we should be doing is we should be trying to do as much of our administrative work during that period, work that doesn't require a lot of brain power.
That's right.
Answering routine emails, filling out TPS reports or whatever. And then the later stage is actually really interesting. That recovery stage is really interesting because our mood is higher than, as you suggest from those 3 charts, our mood is higher than during the trough. However, we're less vigilant than during the peak. And that is a really interesting combination. When we have a higher mood, so we're sort of in a better mood and we're a little looser, we're less vigilant, that makes it a good time for certain kinds of creative work like brainstorming, iterative kinds of things. And what we should be doing is analytic work in the peak, administrative work in the trough, creative insight work in the recovery. And if we do that, we're going to perform a little bit better at work. And the evidence of this is pretty clear. Time of day explains about 20% of the variance in how people perform on these workplace tasks. So that doesn't mean timing is everything, but it means it's a big thing. And the problem is that we don't do that.